What can be done to prevent budgetary earmarks in Washington when it often seems as if one lawmaker's earmark is another's important project in their home district? And let's start with Harry Perkinson on this issue.
You know, if you make the same rules for everybody in Washington, you can do with earmarks. But generally, what happens is that's not the way the game is played. And earmarks are supposed to be money that is already appropriated and just marked for special use. So if everybody can use earmarks, then I say we go after earmarks for the district, bring it back, and do the things in the district that need to be done. If otherwise, no one should get earmarks. It should not be allowed. It should be either vote up or vote down.
Scott Perry.
I think it has to do with transparency, quite honestly. Working in Harrisburg, as soon as everybody, the public especially, knows where the money's going, the politicians are much less apt to move it to nefarious places like stadiums or other questionable spending programs. And also, I think we need some formula revisions. Here again, just looking at the experience in Harrisburg, where we look at how our school funding is meted out and the fact that we pay enormous property taxes here in the center portion of the state, where in other portions of the state they love the property tax because it's so low, and the rest of us here pay for those school districts as a function of our state taxes. The same kind of thing happens in Washington, numerous accounts, whether it's transportation or anything else. And I think the transportation and formula revision would be two keys to making sure that we didn't have to depend on earmarks to make sure that we got $1 back for every dollar we sent in.
Mike Hoppenberg.
I'm for the elimination of all earmarks. I would certainly propose a law to eliminate them completely. That's where the corruptness comes into Washington, where the general public thinks that every politician is bought and paid for. I think if we're going to distribute money back to the districts where it should go, if there is any money, and right now we don't have any, and I don't know how they just keep printing more, I think that it should be equally distributed amongst each district.
Harry Perkinson, Mike does have a good point, though. Both parties have been doing this, correct?
Doing what? Printing money?
Well, printing money and spending it on earmarks in their home districts.
Well, you know, I don't know that we're printing money. We're spending more than we're taking in, that's for sure. So we're deficit. We're running our government in deficit, which is, from a Keynesian point of view, not a bad thing to do when you're in recession or depression. And people have to remember that. You know, we're doing so poorly right now because we had one of the greatest financial recessions in our history here in 2008, and we're digging our way out of that. And that's why we have the deficits we have now, and that's why we need to turn around and make the investments we need to make.
Scott Perry, would you accept that it's possible that perhaps government needs to spend a bit more in a very bad economy like we've had?
I'm not a fan of Keynesian economic theory. It says that you have to lend to yourself to get yourself out, and of course the model we use is World War II, saying that FDR spent our way out of the Depression. I would turn to Europe during that period of time, who suffered the same depression going into the war, but pulled themselves out much more quickly by not spending all that money and not having government choosing the winners and losers. I think it's a market rate-based approach which best decides where the money should be spent at what rate, not the government.
Mike Hoppenberg.
Well, let's just apply it to ourselves. We're buying a house for $150,000. I'm going to get a loan from the bank to buy a house for $150,000, and to pay that mortgage, I'm going to borrow another $150,000 over a period of time to pay that. It just doesn't make any sense, and that's why it doesn't work.
I wanted to turn to sort of a political issue that has been rearing its head here in Pennsylvania the last, for a few months now, but it kind of got resolved recently. The Republican Party here in Pennsylvania, and in many other states for that matter, has been attempting to keep libertarians off the ballot. And Scott Perry, let me start with you. How do you feel about that?
I don't think it's appropriate. I think that regardless of your party, we should all be operating under the same rules. You know, one rule for everybody, and I don't know how it's defensible otherwise.
The Republicans were saying, weren't they, that they didn't think that the Libertarians had enough signatures. And that's part of the rule.
Well, when you say the Republicans, I mean, maybe there's, the party standard or something, but this Republicans think that there should be one standard for all.
Mike Offenberger, feel a bit picked upon as a Libertarian?
Well, not in this election. There was the statewide candidates that were challenged. They did determine through at least 8 weeks long of court battles that they had enough signatures to be on the ballot, so the statewide Libertarian candidates will be there. They were tried to be, and this is one of the reasons why I left the Republican Party. I'm a strong believer in what's good for one is good for everybody. But as far as the statewide goes, from what my understanding was, the state Republican Party wanted to remove Gary Johnson, who's the Libertarian presidential candidate, from the ballot because they feel that he's going to take votes away from Romney, and this is one of those battleground states that they're both in. So.
And Harry Perkinson, do the third parties like the Libertarians and others, do they have a point when they look at both the D's and the R's and say, you know, if they had their way, we would just go away completely?
I think that in terms of them being able to just, participate in the electoral process, they have the right to just conform to the rules. In terms of, the D's and R's trying to get rid of them, the D's and R's have to do their homework and respond to their constituents and remain relevant. And if the Libertarians and Independents can show to the constituents and in the district that they have a better story, then they have the right to stand up and tell that story.
The so-called war on drugs continues to be fought in this country. If elected, what would you do about efforts to rid the nation of illegal drugs? Let me start with Mike Koffenberger on this issue.
Well, as a police officer and a libertarian, I believe that the war on drugs is a failure. We've spent billions of dollars combating what I would consider a social and medical issue over something that we've criminalized, just like alcohol earlier in our country's history, in which when we did that with alcohol, it created criminal gangs, a rise in crime problems. People used to drink anyway, have those parties, and we had the mob. That's basically what the mob got most of their money back then. And that the vast majority of that, at least with alcohol, went away when they legalized it again. I think the drug problem is more of a medical issue. It's more of a social issue than a criminal issue. Work probably towards decriminalizing, or at least eliminating the federal laws on drugs.
On all drugs, or just some?
Both.
Harry Perkins.
I have a problem with some drugs. Methamphetamines, I think, are a real scourge in this country that somehow or another we need to control, but I don't think we control it at the producer level. I think we go and control it at the constituent material level. In other words, the base materials you need for creating those drugs should be controlled. Basically, we've spent a lot of money on a program that we're never going to win. Just like the prohibition showed us that if people want to drink alcohol, they're going to drink alcohol. If people want to use drugs, they're going to use drugs. So I guess my position would be, why don't we let the government regulate it and control who can participate in the market, and then make sure the market doesn't go where it's not supposed to go.
Scott Perry.
I think the key for me would be stronger enforcement on our borders, not only the southern borders, but the seagoing borders as well. I think that there's a lot that's coming in, and we need to be a little tougher with, or maybe a lot tougher in some cases, with our international partners and agreements to have them curb their proliferation and export into our nation with drugs, and then a stronger education policy, starting at the very youngest levels to make sure that young people especially know what the effects of drugs are. I see drugs as bad for our society, illicit drugs as bad for our society, and though we may never win the war, we're not going to win the war on a lot of things that we know are very wrong. That doesn't mean we quit fighting. We need to be more efficient at what we do, and I think there are some provisions we can undertake in that regard.
Yeah, Mike Koffenberger.
I just want to make it clear that I certainly do not advocate the use of drugs. They're very dangerous. I see the effects of them all the time while I'm working as a police officer. However, we have to ask ourselves, how far do we allow the government to control what people put in their own bodies? And also, how many laws do we actually need for these things? I mean, everybody out there that's listening can relate to going into a drugstore and needing to get Sudafed, and then they have to scan their driver's license like they're a common criminal just to make sure that they're not buying bulk Sudafed to manufacture methamphetamine. We take things too extreme in the government, and they just keep adding on more laws. We have to look at the problem in itself, and do we really have a chance of solving this problem through enforcement, or shall we just treat it like it should be as a medical and a social problem?